In this video, I'm going to do a deep dive into penile implants. This is the ultimate solution to erectile dysfunction, but there's a lot of tips and tricks, a lot of perils that you might run into if you ever try to get one. I spent a lot of time doing a lot of research into implants because I was at some point in my life considering getting one after my injury. So I spent many hours researching, many days, even looking at a lot of surgery, and I'm to the point where I feel like I could probably do the surgery myself. I mean, not seriously, but it's something that I'm very familiar with. So I'm gonna go through what an implant is, how does it work, why would you want to get one. I'll do a comparison on the various models, and then most importantly, I'll go through a lot of tips and tricks if you are considering getting one, how to get the best possible results so that you don't lose size and potentially even gain size. So it's going to be a very interesting video. So let's get started. Okay, so first let's do a brief overview as to what is an penile implant. So when I'm talking about penile implants, I'm not talking about things like the Peyronie, which is like this thing that they put on top of your dick that you can get even if you don't have ED, and it makes your dick a lot thicker. I'm not talking about that. That's something that is grotesque to me, to be quite honest. I'm talking about the penile implants that you would get if you have extreme erectile dysfunction. Basically, you're impotent and you cannot get it up. And it's actually like, there's even porn stars that have this, and there's a lot of talk about this, which I'll make a different videos on, porn stars and penile implants. It's quite interesting. But essentially what it is this device, and I'll put a picture here as to what it looks like. There's two types of devices essentially. One is called a malleable, which is basically just a piece of some sort of like rubber. It looks like a rubber rod. There's two of them. Each one of them goes into your chambers, and it's malleable, but it's at a fixed size. And so this is for guys that basically cannot operate, like don't have the dexterity, that are like really old, or maybe they're, in a wheelchair, or, not able to move, have good mobility. So that should be the only time that you would get a malleable one, and usually because they're always in the kind of like in the expanded state, in the stretched state. You have to be undersized, otherwise it could go through your glands if it stays like, if they oversize it. Even if they properly size it, you are pretty much guaranteed to lose size if you get a malleable implant. Then there's the other type of implant, which is the most popular one, which is called the 3-piece implant. This is basically composed of the two rods. There is a reservoir that goes in like kind of like in your abdomen, and then there's the pump, and the pump basically goes into your ball sack. And so essentially when you get it, you get like a third ball. It's very discreet, and I'll go more into that a little bit later, but essentially it's this device. Now for this video, I'm only going to focus on the 3-piece inflatable ones, because I would imagine that my audience is not like paraplegics or guys that don't have the dexterity. Like, you gotta at least be able to use a computer and a mouse and stuff like that. So I would imagine that that in most cases you're gonna want to get the 3-piece inflatable one. So yeah, just don't, why would you ever want to get a malleable one unless you're super old or something? So okay, so why would you want to get an implant? So there's really two reasons why you want to get an implant. One is if you have erectile dysfunction and you're not pills basically don't work on you. So like, you can try PDE5 inhibitors such as Viagra and Cialis, and they are basically not working for you. And also in the case that injections don't work for you, or you do not want to try injections. Now, in my personal opinion, I don't think you should get an implant if you haven't tried injections. Injections are really great. I think they basically saved me from ever getting an implant and rehabilitating my penis. So I'll talk more about that in the end. Yeah, that would be the first case. If you have erectile dysfunction, basically you're impotent and you cannot keep it up to have sex, and pills basically failed you. The second reason is if you have Peyronies, and like a very bad case of Peyronies, such that you have extreme curvature, or if you have ED and you have extreme shortening, or like you lost a lot of girth. So if you have Peyronies and you have ED, you can get an implant. Now, most surgeons recommend that you would just get an implant. At least most reputable surgeons. I don't want to say that. Like, there's a lot of reputable surgeons that can do a lot with Peyronies, but essentially, like, some of the most famous ones, they typically just want to do just the implant, and that fixes most of the issues with Peyronies. Like, it'll expand it'll expand and give you any sort of most of your lost girth. It'll stop atrophy if you have ED. So if you have ED, your penis is going to start to atrophy. So more or less, you're going to lose about 1 centimeter a year if you're not getting nighttime erections, which is a big deal. And so getting an implant basically stops that. And also with Peyronie's, right, like you have the extreme curvature. So like if it's extreme enough where like plication, if you try to get plication, where basically they have one side and they basically straighten it up by putting stitches on the other side, which you are going to lose a lot of length if you have extreme curvature. And you have ED, you're probably better off getting an implant, because if you get a solid implant, it's going to basically straighten up your penis. It may not make it like perfectly straight, but it'll significantly reduce the curvature. Also, if you have Peyronie's, they can do additional surgeries, additional techniques with when they're installing the implants, which I'll go a little bit later in the video. I also briefly want to touch a little bit more as to my story, as to why do I know so much about this. And as I mentioned in other videos, I basically injured my dick when I was having rough sex. This has been already like almost 4 years already. And so during that time, I had very, very bad ED, where I basically couldn't get it up. Then after that, like I basically, my penis started to deviate, to basically curve to the left and upwards. And so during this time where I was trying to figure out like, okay, how do I fix the ED? How do I fix the Peyronie's? I settled on doing traction, and then later on injections, which worked for me. But during all that time, like it took me about a year for me to settle down on injections. I did a lot of research on penile implants, and there's a great forum. It's called franktalk.org. So if you're ever considering getting an implant, this is basically the standard. Like this is where you should go and ask all the questions. There's a ton of helpful people over there that will answer your questions. It's a great forum. I highly recommend it, and that's why I know about penile implants. Okay, so I'll do a little bit more of an explanation as to how it works. So again, I'm only going to focus on the 3-piece inflatable implant. So essentially it's 3 pieces. As I mentioned, there's 2 cylinders. There's the reservoir, and then there's the pump, and it has to be surgically implanted. Now there's basically 3 ways that you can get it surgically implanted. There's the scrotal way, which basically they make an incision by the testicles, and that's why they do they insert everything. They insert the cylinders, the reservoir, and everything. The other one is called infrapubic, which is basically kind of above your pubics. It's like to the side, I'm sorry, to the top of your pubic hair, and they make an incision there. There's also one where they basically do it through your you get a circumcision. I forget exactly the term, but they give you a circumcision if you're not circumcised, and they cut it open there, and then they can insert it through there. I think it's called like coronal or something like that. So so those are the 3 different ways that you can insert it. Regardless of the way that it works is you have, if you think about your penis is not just what you see on the outside. You actually have something what's called the inner penis. So typically, like if you go down sort of on your pelvis and you push down and you follow your penis, and if you could actually follow it, it actually ends and it goes down on average about 6 centimeters. So when you hear me talk about like cylinder lengths, and let's say I say like a crazy amount, like 27 centimeters, we're not talking about 27 centimeters of outer penis. We're talking about 6 centimeters of inner penis and 21 centimeters of outer penis. So just keep that in mind. So there's about 6 centimeters of inner penis, and this is what my doctor, who's a world famous surgeon, actually told me, and I'll go into that into him. I'll talk about him a little bit later. The standard nowadays is using something called a no-touch technique. So essentially, they basically put like a drape over the surgical area, and they never like touch you with their gloves, and it basically reduces the chances of infection. And so basically, they put in the 2 cylinders. They put in so they measure you, they dilate you going down and going up. So let's say they measure you. And then they put the cylinders, and then they put the reservoir, and they put the pump. Basically, after they put the pump in the testicles, they stitch you back up, and you're essentially good to go. There's a lot more to that. I'm considering doing a reaction video to a surgery. I don't know how many people are interested in that. Like I watch them all the time just for fun. I think it's great. It's a great learning experience. So after you have it on, the implants on average should last about 10 years. Sometimes there's failures before the 10 years, but like according to studies, on average it lasts about 10 years, and you do have to get a revision like every 10 years. So if you're a young guy, let's say you're in your 30s, and you kind of have to take that into account. You might need like 4, maybe potentially 5 surgeries throughout your life. But these are well tolerated surgeries. It's really not a huge deal. They're the top of the best doctors in the world can do it, especially if you don't have any like issues like Peyronie's or anything like that. They can do it, or fibrosis. They can do it in like 20-30 minutes. It's a quick operation. It's still surgery, but it's a very well studied surgery that has been done since like the 1970s. Okay, so next I want to talk about the 2 most popular models of implants. That would be the Boston Scientific AMS and the Coloplast Titan. These are the 2 AMS, Boston Scientific and Coloplast are basically the 2 companies that operate here in the US. There's another one up and coming called Rigicon, but it's still not. I believe they're still going through studies and trials right now. But the 2 most popular models are the AMS and the Titan. So first, to start with the AMS. So the AMS is made by Boston Scientific, and what makes this one sort of unique is that it's actually coated. It's embedded with an antibiotic. So technically, like the way that they're marketed is that it has a lower chance of infection. But that's arguable because I'll talk about that. What the Coloplast Titan does, sort of as a competition to that. So the way it is, it's a little bit better because it's softer and can contract a little bit more. So they have basically three models. So they have the LGX, the CX, and the CXR. So LGX it stands for length and girth expansion. But this doesn't mean what you think it means. Sort of try to market it. I think a lot of guys think like, oh, this is going to expand in length and its girth. No, it's not really the case. So it's not really what you think, that it's going to expand in length and girth. What this means is that when at its maximal length and at its maximal girth, it's going to be at your most erect length and at your most erect girth. But when it contracts, it's going to contract more than other models such that you have a more natural looking flaccid. So that's really all it is that it gives you a more natural looking flaccid, which to me, I couldn't give a fuck less, right? Like, in fact, I think one of the advantages of having an implant is that it makes you more into a shower. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. So that's really what the LGX for. Then you have the CX, which is like the control expansion. It's made of a little bit different material. It doesn't contract as much as the LGX, and it's a little bit stronger, and it's actually comparable to the Titan, which I'll talk a bit about in a little bit. And this is more used in cases like if you have Peyronie's, it's a little bit stronger. So if you have a curvature, it has a higher chance that it's going to correct the curvature. Then there's the CXR. It's just like the CX, the control expansion, but it's a narrow model. So a lot of the time, like if you have a really narrow penis, and this can be, because you're just naturally narrow, or because of corporal fibrosis or Peyronie's, or you have like, scar tissue or something that's preventing a regular size, a regular girth cylinder to go up the corpora. They would use the narrow cylinders. So this would basically, this is used in those cases. Now, next I'm going to talk about the cylinder length for the AMS. So the cylinder length starts at 12 centimeters. And again, remember that I'm talking about, this includes the inner penis and the outer penis. So it'll be like if you have about 6 centimeters of outer penis. So if you're, almost like a micro penis, like they basically make that for those cases. So it goes from 12 centimeters, 15 centimeters, 18 centimeters, 21 centimeters, and a maximum of 24 centimeters. Now this has to be ordered specifically. And notice how they basically jump about, a few centimeters. So, from 12 to 15, that's 3, 15 to 18, that's 3. They basically jump, and notice how they jump basically 3 centimeters. And the reason for this is because you're supposed to use like rear tip extenders. So let's say someone is actually, 22 or 23 centimeters. You can attach like 1 or 2 rear tip extenders. Now, rear tip extenders you shouldn't, basically, my opinion is that you shouldn't attach more than 1 centimeters of rear tip extenders. And I'll touch into that a little bit more in the video. Next, I want to talk about the Titan, the Coloplast. I love the fucking Titan. The name Titan Titan is like Attack on Titan. I'm a big anime nerd. So the difference with this is that compared to the AMS is that the AMS is basically has something that it's embedded with an antibiotic. But the Coloplast, the Titan, has a hydrophilic coating. Hydrophilic means that it can absorb water, it retains water, it binds with water with a solution, and basically this means that it can be dipped in any antibiotic. So it's, surgeons are not just bound by the antibiotic that comes with the AMS, but they can actually, custom tailor the antibiotic that they're gonna use with the implant on their patient. So again, there's only a single model, unlike the AMS, who has LGX, CX, CXR. This one, there's only one model. It's called the Titan, and they come in different cylinder lengths. So this one actually comes with the 14, 16, 18, 20, 22 centimeters, and that's the standard size. And then there's what's called the XL, and the XL models come in 24 centimeters, 26 centimeters, and 28 centimeters, which is basically the longest penile implant that you can get on the market today. The difference in girth is actually very important, because the XL it's girthier. It's basically can expand more girth wise than the AMS. So compared to the AMS CX, the Coloplast Titan XL is actually 17% wider, girthier than the AMS. So basically, if you have a big penis, you have to essentially get a Titan, unless you're willing to basically sacrifice some girth, or the surgeon just puts a shit ton of rear tip extenders, which they're also called like RTEs. If you hear me say RTEs, that means for rear tip extenders. I'll talk a little bit more. I'll compare them a little bit later on. The only other difference between in the Coloplast Titan is that it does have two different types of pumps. So the pumps is a thing that goes in your scrotum, in your ball sack, basically. And there's one called the Classic, and the other one is called the One Touch. They say that the One Touch is basically newer, so you're supposed to just touch it once, and basically that it's supposed to make it easier for the penis to deflate. They're about the same size. There's a lot of arguments as to which one is actually better. I'm not really going to touch on that. From my point of view, they're both essentially the same. I think they say that the Classic is slightly smaller, but like very, very slightly. But the One Touch is a little bit easier to use. So I think for young guys, you probably want the Classic, just because it's a little bit smaller. You have more dexterity, so you don't really need the ease of use. So yeah, that's a brief overview of the Coloplast Titan and the Boston Scientific AMS. Okay, so one of the biggest questions that are asked are basically around length and girth. So length is a little bit trickier. It really depends on a few factors, mainly the type of incision that is made, whether it's infrapubic or scrotal. I won't really talk about the circumcision one, because that's really not done a whole lot, only in certain very extreme cases where they have to sort of do other work in the tunica. Maybe they have to do like they have to cut out like a plaque and do grafting or something like that. And even maybe in those cases they'll put it in through the coronal incision. But I'm just going to talk about most cases here, which is the infrapubic and scrotal incision. So a lot of that, it depends on, the type of incision can have a lot to say with your, the size, as far as length goes. And also a lot of it has to do with the surgeon that you're using. So you have to go to a surgeon that's not scared to size you correctly. A lot of surgeons basically do, let's say they put a cylinder in, and even though it's not the right size, they don't test it. They don't even do a testing in the surgery room to test to see if it's the right size. And basically when it says the right size, it means that the cylinders have to go midway to the glands. Okay, and a lot of the times they'll make excuses, and you've seen this in the forums all the time. They'll make excuses of like, oh yeah, I just couldn't get him up, or we just want to avoid erosion or stuff like that. I mean, that's bullshit essentially. A good surgeon, which I'll mention a few at the end of the video, essentially can cut out fibrotic tissue. So let's say that you have fibrotic tissue even close to the glands. They'll just cut that out carefully and make enough space so that they can put the cylinders all the way to the middle of the glands. So so I think like basically other surgeons that are not able to put them all the way to the middle of the glands are coping because they're just not as skilled as these other surgeons. So the surgeon that you get is absolutely critical. So to me, this was so important that I chose a surgeon. Well, my doctor is in New York. I live in LA. So, I was willing, like when I was looking, I was willing to like get a loan and go and like pay this, even if my insurance didn't want to pay it, right? Like that's how important it is to get a good surgeon. And so for me, like when people say like, oh, I just can't afford it, I don't know. I mean, you can get a loan for like $30,000, which is one of the best surgeons will cost you. That's like getting a loan for a car. So like, I don't know. I don't see the excuse, to be quite honest. But hey, if you're like elderly and a fixed income, maybe. But otherwise, I don't buy that excuse of like, why not go to a good surgeon? And then you also see cases where like people go live even on the other side of the world, and they literally travel here to the US to the best doctors, to the best surgeons in the US to get it done. So I don't think like, oh, I just don't want to travel. I mean, that's also an excuse that I just don't get, because you literally have people traveling from all over the world to go see these guys, and for a reason, right? And going to the best surgeons gives you the best results lengthwise. Now, girth wise, that is something that really, it doesn't really matter what the surgeon does. Like girth is kind of fixed. So essentially, if your girth is of 12 centimeters or less, putting in an implant will essentially give you more girth, will expand your girth, right? So if you have a narrow penis, the implant is a tissue expander, so it's going to expand your girth and give you more girth. That's if you have 12 centimeters or more. If you have 12 centimeters or less. If you have 17 centimeters or more of girth, you're basically going to keep your girth or lose girth. There's basically no implant in the world, not even the Titan XLs, which will give you more than 17 centimeters worth of girth. So if you have a very girthy penis and more than 17 centimeters, just know that you would be losing girth regardless. Now the good news is that if you're in between, and let's say you have a Titan XL, then you would potentially be getting up to 17 centimeters of girth. Now, this has a lot to do with like your spongy tissue, how well you retain that. So a lot of guys that have like radical prostatectomy, or have like soft gland syndrome, or like basically the spongy tissue around the corpora, around the around the circumference of the penis just doesn't expand, then you may not get that maximal girth. But if you retain that, let's say that you can take like some Cialis, or you put on some a Trimix suppository or Trimix gel on top of the, like if you have an implant, you can still take Cialis, you can still take a Trimix gel or a suppository, and it will basically help you get full engorgement. In any case, you can maximally get a 17 centimeters worth of girth with a Titan XL, which has the maximum girth from all the types of implant. Okay, so next I want to give you all the tips for getting the absolutely best results when it comes to getting a penile implant. So a lot of guys complain that they lost size. And again, this can be due to many factors. One is if you have ED, if you're impotent and you're not getting erections, the more you wait, the more you lose. If you don't use it, you lose it essentially. So if you're impotent and you're not getting erections over the span of like 1 or 2 years, you're gonna lose essentially about 1 to 2 centimeters a year, which is brutal, right? So the best way to offset this is to use a vacuum erection device every day. I would recommend about 20 to 30 minutes. And again, everything that I'm saying is backed by studies. Specifically for this tips and tricks one, I'm gonna list out all the studies down in the description below. But essentially, use a vacuum erection device, and this has been shown to not only stop the atrophy, potentially reverse any lost size, but it's going to allow the surgeon to put in the largest possible cylinders in your penis. And also, if you have any sort of like corporal fibrosis, it expands the corpora such that they can put the regular size or the XL size cylinders and not the narrow cylinders, right? And so it just, and also like it marginally can increase your length. But if you really want to increase your length, you should be doing traction. So there's I found like just 3 studies on this alone, which I'll link below. But essentially, if you do traction therapy, you can get longer cylinders. Okay, so like this is something that I thought about, and when I was going through it, It's like, hey, my dick is already injured. I already have ED, and like, what's the worst that could happen when I do like traction? Obviously, doing it safely with devices, and I don't really recommend doing manual traction. Like, not only is it inefficient, but it's also dangerous. But you can get a traction device, and you can sit and you can use the traction device, and it'll make your penis longer, such that you get the maximum cylinder length. Okay, so let's say that you want to do traction for like 1 or 2 years. You could potentially gain about 1.5 inches, and then get those maximal cylinders. So let's say that let's say that you want a Coloplast Titan, which is the way it's basically, spoiler alert, like, you should be wanting a Coloplast Titan, right? Especially if you're young. There's no reason to get an AMS unless you're like old and you care about the gym, and like someone sees it, like, who gives a fuck, honestly, in my opinion. Like, someone sees it that it's big and like asks questions. I don't give a fuck about that. But in any case, let's say that your surgeon sort of measures you, and they tell you, oh, you're most likely you're gonna get a Coloplast Titan 22 centimeters. Well, let's say that you wait a year or two, use a VED, do traction 4 to 6 hours every day, and you're gonna gain about an inch and a half in length. Then by the next time, and this actually happened to me, right? Then your next time, the surgeon can measure you, and then he can basically fit you with a better, longer cylinder, like the Titan XL, which is girthier and longer. And so, so this is actually something that happened to me. I went to see my doctor. He was like, oh, you might need the 24 centimeters if you choose to do the implant. And then I waited like a year or so. I did a ton of traction. I went to see him again, and he was like, yeah, it's actually, like, you're actually probably going to need the 26 centimeter, the 26 centimeter implant. And so, it's kind of obvious that the traction works, and also there's a ton of studies to back this up. So going back to the Coloplast versus AMS, absolutely you should be getting the Coloplast, unless you're like, I just fail to see a reason why you would want an AMS, unless, like, again, maybe you're older and you don't want to offend people, because like when you get a Coloplast Titan, you're basically you're always a shower, and you're always gonna have a big bulge in your pants, which to me is actually a plus. Like, I think that's a benefit, honestly. But if you don't want that, maybe a little older, you get embarrassed, maybe you want to get the AMS. But in either case, I think you should get the Coloplast Titan. Like, it's like a no-brainer to me. It also, according to the studies, has higher rigidity, has better axial support, meaning like you can have like rougher sex, and like it's gonna take all those forces, and it has a higher satisfaction rate than the AMS, which is, I think, crucial. So I'll link all these studies below. So I think another tip, so I already said, use a VED to offset ED. You do traction so you can get the longer cylinders, and try to get a Coloplast Titan. Particularly aim for the Coloplast Titan XL, which are the girthier ones. Now, let's say that pills stop working, I don't want to do injections anymore. My goal is to get a Coloplast Titan XL 28 centimeters. That's my goal. Any more than that, I wouldn't want that, because after that they would have to use rear tip extenders, and rear tip extenders are not good, which I'll talk about in a second. But before I talk about that, I'm going to talk about the type of incision that you get. So there's the two types of incisions. So there's the infrapubic and the scrotal. So again, the two type of incisions are the infrapubic and the scrotal. Again, I won't talk about the coronal. The coronal is actually, from the studies, that you can get decent results from it. In any case, most cases, you're going to get an infrapubic or scrotal. So you should absolutely go to a surgeon that does the scrotal approach. Do not get the infrapubic unless you have no other option, right? And what is the reason for this? There's two reasons for this. Number one is a scar. So if you get the infrapubic one, you will get a scar basically above your pubic area, and which is very, very noticeable. Like, it's not gonna go away. And so I don't want any sort of scars. Like, I don't think it's one of those cool scars like you could get. I don't think it's a cool scar at all. So the second reason is that you can get longer cylinders if you go the scrotal way. The potential downside of the scrotal is they say that you heal a little bit easier from the pubic one, but to me, like, the pain, like the potential slight increase in recovery is worth it, because I want the maximum cylinder length. Okay, And again, I'm gonna link the study below, but I think it's important enough where I'm actually going to go through it here for a second. Okay, so this is one of the more controversial points out there. It's like and I'm very, very much so in the side of the scrotal approach. Okay, so here we have the study. It says comparison of the infrapubic versus scrotal approach for inflatable penile prosthesis placement, and this is basically a multi-institution report. So it wasn't just one institution. So let's just look at the juicy part. So here it says, compare with infrapubic, scrotal placement resulted in a longer prosthesis. So 22.3 centimeters versus 20.6 centimeters. That's like a whole inch. So there you go. I wanted to address that, which is like a controversial thing. And again, I'll link the study below so you can just read it yourself, but you saw it right here. Next, I want to talk about rear tip extenders. So essentially, as you saw me mention before, in the cylinder lengths, there's gaps in sizing. So from, in the case of the Titan, for example, it goes from 22 to 24. So the Titan basically jumps in 2 centimeters, whereas the AMS jumps in 3 centimeters, which is, very, very important because you want to minimize the use of rear tip extenders. Rear tip extenders are basically this piece of plastic, and I'll point one out here so you can see the comparison of a rear tip extender and versus the inflatable part. But it's not inflatable, and it's just like a little piece of plastic that you can attach at the end of the cylinder, and that goes inside into the inner penis. So basically, it's not inflatable. And I think 1 centimeter is perfectly acceptable, but but even then, like, it's basically you're going to start losing the axial stability of the penis. So basically, it's gonna start to wobble a little bit because that part is not inflatable. It's not as sturdy as the rest of the implant. So you should not be getting more than 1 centimeter of rear tip extenders. And again, this goes back into the AMS, like, because they jump into by 3 centimeters, you're most likely to get about 2 centimeters worth of rear tip extenders, and you don't want that. So what my doctor and what like other surgeons do, like the best surgeons in the world, and let's say that, for example, let's say that you have a Coloplast Titan, and let's say that you're 25 centimeters. Remember that they make implants in 24 centimeters and 26 centimeters. But let's say they measure you at 25 centimeters. You can either take the 24 centimeter one. Actually, you know what? Let me use a better example. So let's say that that they measure you at 23 centimeters. Remember that there's the Coloplast Titan, the 22 centimeter, which is the standard size, or there's the 24 centimeter, which is the XL. What a lot of surgeons would do is they would take the standard size, the 22 centimeters, add 1 rear tip extender because they measured you at 23, call it a day. But what the best doctors, the best surgeons in the world are going to do is they're going to take the 24 centimeter and trim off 1 centimeter at the end. So like just the regular implant has this little thing at the end, which is about one and a little bit over 1 centimeter, which is a little bit of plastic. Now, when you add the rear tip extender, it goes into that. But what they can do is they can take the larger centimeter and cut off the tip such that it becomes a 23 centimeter. So if you measure you at 23, instead of putting the regular size one, they will put the XL size one with 1 centimeter of basically trimmed off the end, such that even though you're 23 centimeters and you don't technically qualify for the XL, you can get the XL implant, the 24 centimeters. So, and not only that, you get maximal cylinder inflation. So basically, most of the part of the penis will be inflatable, and so you will get the best axial rigidity. So if your doctor ends up putting like more than 1 centimeter, like 2 or more, that's ridiculous. And to me, it's a sign of an incompetent surgeon. And again, I'll put the studies. Like, I'm just not just talking out of my ass. I'll put the studies for this down below. Next, let's say that you got your implant done. You need to start cycling as early as possible. Okay, so when they cut open the penis, they insert the cylinder. They're causing a lot of trauma. And also the body, because you have foreign objects inside the body. Now these foreign objects, I believe, are made of like silicone, and the body is not going to outright reject them. You're not going to have like an allergic reaction to it. But the body is going to start forming what's called a pseudo capsule. Is basically this tissue. It's kind of like strong tissue around the cylinder. Okay, and this is going to start early, about 1 or 2 days after the cylinders have been implanted. Your body cells are going to start forming this capsule. So just like Peyronie's, you do not want this capsule to form in a contracted state, because if it forms contracted, your cylinders are not going to be able to maximally expand. Okay, so it's absolutely critical that you start cycling the device as early as possible, and you have to be pretty aggressive in the cycling. That means that you inflate it up as much as you can. You can leave it up for like 30 minutes, bring it back down, wait a little bit, do it again, and the more the better, essentially. Obviously talk to your surgeon, because the stitches have to be done just right, and such that for example, I'll tell you about my Dr. Ead's protocol. Is he uses waterproof stitches, and then he'll have you lay on a warm bathtub, and then he'll have you take like a little bit of painkillers, like ibuprofen, stuff like that. You'll sit in the hot tub, and the warm water basically brings down the swelling in the scrotum. The painkillers basically kills the pain a little bit, and then you can start inflating, and you inflate on day 3. So by day 3, you're gonna get an erection. You should be doing this on your own, and cycling as much as you can. And what this does is make sure that pseudo capsule doesn't form in a contracted space, such that you get the maximal girth from the implant. So this is absolutely killer. Like if you don't start cycling right away, like let's say, a lot of the time it's sad, honestly, like you'll see surgeons like, oh, we'll wait a month, like, because they're just busy. And we're gonna cycle. We're gonna try out your device like a month from now. You'll come back to my office, and then we'll do it then. Like, no, that's dumb. Like, you can do it yourself. Obviously, it depends on the like you have to go to a good surgeon so that they make it possible for you to start cycling earlier. Don't just do it because I'm telling you, and not just with any surgeon. You have to go to a surgeon, and they have to give you the go ahead to start cycling early. Basically all the surgeons that I'm going to go through at the end of the video allow you to start cycling early, but Dr. Ead has the record of at day 3 he's going to start having you cycle early, and this is absolutely critical. Next, I want to talk about even maximizing your results even with a penile implant. So after you get a penile implant, you can get hyaluronic acid filler. Now, you can get hyaluronic acid without an implant, but you can also get it with an implant. And the beauty of getting it with an implant is you're gonna get much better results than you would if you didn't have an implant. And this is great. And it's great for 2 things. Number 1, you can gain a significant amount of girth. Like there's guys in the forums that get this, and it looks great, And 2, it's also gonna help carry the warmth of the body, so it feels a little bit warmer to the touch. A lot of guys complain that your penis can feel cold because of the saline and the cylinders. So this kind of creates this extra coating such that it keeps the penis a little bit warmer. And in any case, the reason that you get much better results that if you weren't having if you didn't have an implant is because if you didn't have an implant, your penis is essentially going to contract, and then that filler is going to get disorganized, and it's going to get a little bit lumpy, and it may essentially go away. Whereas if you have an implant, you can basically keep it inflated as much as possible, such that that filler remains uniform. And it's much easier, and the results are great. So you can basically imagine you can get the Titan XL and then get hyaluronic acid filler for absolutely maximal results. So just imagine like the best case results is you get a Titan 28 XL because you're doing a lot of traction. You get the 28 XL, so you get like the maximal girth, and then on top of that you get the filler, so 28 centimeter Titan XL with the filler. I mean, you're basically getting like a porn star dick right there. And if you basically just need to do a lot of traction and get a good surgeon and do all that good stuff, and then get the filler. So yeah, I think filler is a great option. It's something that if I were to get the implant, like I would absolutely get the filler. I think no question about it. Next, I want to talk about the glands and engorgement. So just because you have an implant doesn't mean that you cannot take PDE5 inhibitors. So a lot of the guys, especially with that get like radical prostatectomy or like are impotent, that also means that their glands is not gonna get swollen, right? Like the corpus spongiosum, which is what runs at the bottom, is not gonna get engorged. So even with an implant, like that just basically expands the corpus cavernosum And so it doesn't expand the spongiosum. And so it doesn't really expand like the last parts of the glands, right? It'll expand like the beginning because it goes to the mid glands. And so there's a few ways that you can get around this, such that you get glands and spongiosum expansion. You can take PDE5 inhibitors such as Viagra or Cialis. You can take trimix gel. So you can use the trimix gel, and that basically engorges your spongiosum. Or you can also take like a suppository of like Trimix or PGE1. And the suppository is essentially this little tablet that goes down your pee hole. You put it down, you hold your pee hole, and you dissolve it. And this basically helps expand your spongiosum. So that's a pretty comprehensive set of tips and tricks that I've learned about, that I've researched about, that I'm the one, this is what I would do. Basically, like, I'm giving you everything that I've researched and what I would do and why I chose the surgeon that I chose, and why in the list of surgeons that I'm going to go through at the end, why I chose them as a top tier surgeon. Okay, next, I want to talk a little bit about additional techniques that can be done in the surgery room while you're getting a penile implant. So number one is, let's say that you have Peyronie's and you have a curvature. They put in the implants and you see that you still have a significant curvature. What they're going to do is they're going to model it. So essentially what they're going to do is they're going to take the penis and they're going to let's say your curvature is upwards, they're gonna model it so to break off the plaque. And it's funny, like when you're watching the surgery videos, you can literally hear cracking noises because they're cracking the scar tissue, the fibrotic tissue, and if it's calcified, the calcified tissue, and you can literally hear the cracking. So they'll basically model it. That makes the penis way straighter. And this is like super simple, low risk, highly tolerated. And it's also why it's important to start cycling early, such as if they do any modeling, that you're healing in an expanded state, so that you don't get the curvature again. Essentially, let's just say that you're not doing the early cycling, it can essentially come back and potentially even worse. So you wanna do the early, essentially. Some surgeons can also do what's called relief incisions. So basically, let's say that you have some scar tissue, by the side of your of where they did the incision for the surgery. What they'll do is they'll call relief incision. So if there's a plaque around there, they'll basically just kind of cut it so that the scar tissue basically lets go, and then that'll basically fix any sort of curvature that you have that's being caused by that area. Super simple. And again, this is why it's important to cycle early, because you want that area to basically heal up. Another technique that they can do is called the scratch technique. So before they put in the cylinder, they go in the corpora and they take like a little kind of like looks like a toothpick. So something like a hook, has like a metal thing like a hook. They put it in there and they scratch the plaque from the inside. And again, I've seen videos of this and you can literally hear like the cracking noises. It goes like crack, and essentially they crack open that Peyronie's plaque, and that basically it's again low risk, easy to do while you're in the operating room. And then basically that's how they break up the Peyronie's plaque, so that you can basically fix the curvature, put the cylinders in, and you're good to go. I already mentioned this, but in the case that you have corporal fibrosis, a good surgeon is not going to give up, and like they're basically have little instruments that they can use to cut through the corporal fibrosis all the way to the mid glands, such that they can put the cylinders all the way up to the mid glands. So if you have corporal fibrosis, go to a good surgeon, and they'll be able to cut through that, basically with the instrument. Also, you can also do excision and grafting. In this case, this is where they do the coronal cut. So basically cut by the coronal, by the circumcision, basically. And from there, they skin the penis and they essentially excise the Peyronie's plaque. This is in cases that the Peyronie's plaque is pretty extensive. And I think I'll do a video about like the different types of surgeries for Peyronie's. But essentially, they excise the Peyronie's plaque and then they put a surgical graft on it. They sew it up. And then they put in the cylinders right there and there from the coronal incision, and then it sort of depends on your case. In any case, they can do excision and grafting while they're doing the implant. There's another one called like the tunicle expansion procedure. But essentially this is the same. They circumcise you, they pull back the skin, and they make incisions, like kind of like relief incisions around the plaque. And this basically, like, if you lost girth, and there's actually a case on Frank Talk about this. He had amazing results. He had a very narrow penis because of the Peyronie's. He went and got the tunical expansion procedure. He got the implant through the coronal incision, and basically the surgeon made the cuts, and then his penis basically went back to normal. So he was able to maximally regain that girth. It's great. So you can get the tunical expansion procedure. There's also much riskier techniques, such as the sliding technique or the modified sliding technique. There's a few surgeons here in the US that do that, but essentially this is in the case that you lost length. There's two ways that you can regain the girth. One is, like I mentioned, make the cuts, and I'll see if I put an image as to what that looks like here. But they make cuts in the tunica, and that basically releases the plaque and lets you go get your length back. Another one is where they essentially a little bit kind of like a more extensive version of that is they essentially need to separate the neurovascular bundle and potentially the urethra from the tunica, because the plaque is basically underneath the neurovascular bundle, and they basically need to separate all that. So they basically separate all that. I'll put an image as to what that looks like, and then they'll make cuts. They can potentially even cut out kind of like an L here, and I'll try to find an image. You make an L, and then that basically relieves the contraction from the plaque and lets you expand the penis maximally, such that you're only limited by your neurovascular bundle and your urethra at that point. Then they'll put a graft on it, put it back together like Humpty Dumpty, and you're good to go. And that gives you, I've seen cases where that, like, one guy regained like 3.5 centimeters. Actually, there's a study on that. I'll try to find it and link it here. But he regained about 3.5 centimeters of lost length. And actually, I'm not even sure what his original size, but he gained from the size where when he went to get the operation to when he came out of the operating room, he gained 3.5 centimeters of length through the sliding technique. Now, these are extremely dangerous. You can get something called glans necrosis, which is why they created the modified sliding technique, which is a little bit safer. Glans necrosis is no joke. I'll talk about that in a little bit. So yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the additional techniques that you may want to ask about. I'm sure your surgeon, will tell you. But you may want to look a little bit more if you have like a severe case of Peyronie's, for example. That's not responding to hours and hours of traction. So a lot of guys that I see is like, they'll do like application, for example, or they'll do like the excision and grafting. Then I'm like, well, how many hours of traction a day were you doing? I was like, oh, I did it for like 20 minutes, 1 hour a day. And like, it wasn't working for me. So traction doesn't work. I'm like, bro, you need to do that shit like 6 hours a day. Okay. Like, I don't want to hear, it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, why would you get a shorter penis? Why would you get through some insane amount of like surgery and risk and all this when you could have just done traction for like 6 hours and get the best possible outcomes without like any sort of extra sort of surgeries that that you really shouldn't get, unless like the extensive hours of surgery really wasn't enough to overcome the Peyronie's, or like you lost an incredible amount of girth where like just a vacuum erection device just wasn't able to. I think that's more likely a case than traction. I think traction will make it longer, but I don't think a VD or like even joking or anything like that, I don't know if that can overcome a severe case of girth loss by Peyronie's. Okay, next I want to talk about some of the complications that can happen when you get a penile implant. So number one, if you get something like a Titan, or you don't get like the LGX, which basically contracts a little bit better, gives you a better flaccid, you can get what's called dog ears. So it's essentially, imagine like a pair of cylinders that is not like a balloon, like a long balloon that's not like inflated, that's made of like a sturdier material, not just like that rubbery latex. It's going to go like this, and then you're going to have like dog ears on the sides here. And that can be a little unsightly. So if you get like the Titan, the 28XL, you could potentially get like the dog ears. Over time, it does get better because the cylinder is softening up a little bit. So basically it means like there's like, it kind of looks like dog ears on the side of the penis. It's really not a big deal, and it's only really an issue if you're like fully flaccid, like if you fully deflate. So a workaround for this is you just like slightly inflate so that it makes your dick a little bit bigger, your flaccid a little bit bigger, but it hides the dog ears. And to me, that's an advantage. I don't think the dog ears is a huge deal, in my opinion. The big one is an infection. So infection is really like the number one risk, and why, I'm particularly scared of getting an implant, even though I'm going to, like, I have my surgeon is one of the best with the lowest infection rates in the world. But you have a higher chance of infection. It's about 1 to 3%. And the surgeons that are the high volume surgeons, they have the lowest infection rates in the industry. So the better the surgeon, the lower your chance of an infection. If you have things like diabetes, or you have something like HIV or something that messes with your immune system, that can slightly increase your chances. But again, if you go to a good surgeon, the risk is minimal. And different doctors have different protocols as to what happens if you do get an infection. So most surgeons, what they'll do is they'll essentially they'll do what's called a salvage. So they'll basically have to take out the implant. They basically bathe the corpora, bathe the tissue in antibiotic, and then they put a malleable implant, right? They put a malleable implant, and then you have to wait like 3 to 6 months before they can try again to put a new implant. The downside of this is you are going to lose size. You are going to lose, because in that time period, you're going to have scar tissue form, and that malleable is only going to prevent it from shrinking so much. And that malleable has to be smaller. So you are going to lose at least 2 centimeters, if not more, of length if you get an infection and you have this protocol in place. There's other surgeons that have a different protocol where they basically take everything out, they bathe it with antibiotic, but they don't put anything in. But they have you use a vacuum erection device diligently every day, multiple times a day. What this does is make sure that if any sort of scar tissue forms, it's going to form in a maximal state, and it makes make sure that the corpora doesn't shut down due to scar tissue. So it keeps the corpora open, but you have to be diligent about this. And one of the surgeons has this protocol. I think it's very interesting. I'm unsure if you can combine the both. But what's interesting about this protocol is that you're not going to lose size, because you're using the vacuum erection device to stretch the penis. So what you could do is use traction. Say you got an infection, they took it out, or even if they put a malleable, you do traction to make sure that it doesn't shrink, and you use the vacuum erection device to keep the corpora open so that you don't lose girth. Okay, so that would be my personal protocol if I were to get an infection. That's what I would choose. So it's sort of something interesting. Next is what you can get is what's called the floppy glands. What this means is that the surgeon put the cylinders, but they didn't go all the way to the mid glands. So basically your glands is going to basically fold down sort of like this. And that's called the floppy glands syndrome. And this is essentially caused by incompetence from the surgeon, because they weren't able to get it all the way to the mid glands. There's very, very, very small rare cases of guys that naturally have floppy glands, because the corpora just doesn't go naturally to the mid glands. But if you're a guy where you did not have floppy glands before the surgery, after the surgery you got floppy glands, you guarantee that it was incompetence of the surgeon, because you're not anatomically, you're not one of those guys that just naturally has floppy glands. Okay, but there are cases where they do have the floppy glands. So yeah, that's why it's absolutely important that you go to a good surgeon. Next is so you could get something called erosion. So this is in the case where you were like grossly oversized. Specifically, if it was in the case of a malleable. So if a malleable is oversized, the penis is going to try to contract and go down, and the implant is going to start coming out of the glands. It's horrible. It's horrible. If you look at the picture of what this looks like, it's disgusting. But this only happens again if you don't have a good surgeon, a surgeon that is like, you can get undersized, but you can also get oversized, and you don't want that either. You want to be right sized. Okay, that means going to the mid glands, no rear, like minimize rear tip extenders, but the right, like go to the mid size when maximally inflated, such that it's not pushing up on the glands. If you were slightly oversized, that's fine. It's not a big deal. You can just do a little bit of traction on the glands. With a vacuum cup traction device, and that'll essentially stretch the penis such that over time you're gonna be fine. So if you are feeling that the cylinders are pushing through your glands, you just need to do traction. You don't necessarily need to get revised. Just do traction. If you're feeling it when you're maximally like in traction and you're still feeling that, then yeah, you need to get a revision in those cases. But in most cases you don't. But yeah, this doesn't really happen in with reputable surgeons. Lastly, like the worst possible thing that could go wrong is something called glands necrosis, and it's as horrible as it sounds. Basically, blood flow stops to the glands and becomes the glands forces the glands basically become necrotic, and it turns black, and they have to cut off the glands. Horrible. Now this really only happens when you have when you do something more than just an implant. So as I mentioned, like most likely, like it could happen with the sliding technique, which is why they basically don't really do the sliding technique nowadays. They do like the modified sliding technique, because with the traditional sliding technique they have to cut off blood supply to the glands. And like if 30 minutes of or more of blood supply to the glands gets cut off, it'll start becoming necrotic. Side note, which is why I'm not a huge fan of clamping for very long. If you're doing priapisms with injections, it doesn't affect blood flow to the glands. So keeping take care of your glands, guys. Like it's important. And so in any case, this is the most horrifying. I think it's between erosion and glands necrosis. I think I'll give it to glands necrosis for being the most horrifying one. But again, it only happens when you have like the sliding technique. Otherwise, it really shouldn't happen. So there you go. Those are some of the complications that can go wrong. Next, I'll go through some of the best surgeons in the world and what's so good about them. Some of the different pros and cons about them. Okay, so here comes my list of suggested surgeons. So I'll pretty much go in somewhat order of best to not the best. It's a hard order, but I'll start with Dr. Francois Ede. This is my personal surgeon. He lives in New York City. He essentially invented the no-touch technique, which is the standard technique in which to do an implant nowadays. He does the scrotal incision, which, as I mentioned, is the best type of incision. He has the record for the earliest cycling, which is 3 days. He does do like relief incisions. He does do things like glands filler. So they say that you have your glands don't expand. You can get filler into the glands to make it look a little bit more plump. He does have a good size record, so he's gonna size you correctly. He has the lowest infection record. He's a super high volume surgeon. It's less than 1% infection record. Now as far as the infection protocol, he's one of the ones that will put like a malleable implant. So that's the only sort of potential downside. I think I prefer the one where where they take everything out and I would just use a VED every day and traction. But I wonder if you could use a VED with a malleable one. Like, I'm not sure. So I don't know if they're even mutually exclusive, to be quite honest. A couple things is he's up there in age. I think he's almost like 70 something, honestly. So he's up there in age. He's still an expert. He's still up there. But next I'll talk about what would be my second one. Should he retire? Should I need one in the next few years? And that would be Dr. Tariq Haki. He's based in Atlanta. He also does the no-touch technique. He does the scrotal incision, and he has a great size record. I mean, he's gotten cases where the previous surgeon basically left the patient with the floppy glands, and he went in there and fixed it by placing proper cylinder size. So he has a great size record. He would be my basically second option should Dr. Ede retire. I don't know about his infection protocol, to be quite honest. Then there's Dr. Clavel, Jonathan Clavel. He has a practice in Houston. He also uses the no-touch technique. He also uses the scrotal incision. He has a good size record. I wouldn't say as good as Dr. Haki. I have seen cases of people complaining about a length loss, but I think it was like 1. And it's it's hard to judge. But like Haki and Ede is like I don't think I've seen a case where he didn't size them correctly. He does advanced techniques. He actually does the modified sliding technique. He basically, if you have like Peyronie's, severe Peyronie's, I would basically basically go and consult with Dr. Clavel. I think he can potentially do some more of those more advanced surgeries. I don't think Dr. Hackey and Dr. Eid really, for sure Dr. Eid doesn't do like any sort of more advanced than just like a relief incision, otherwise a straight implant. He will refer you to other people should you need like more than that. But Dr. Clavel, he is one of the ones that that uses the modified sliding technique. Next is Dr. Andrew Kramer. He's based in Baltimore. He also uses a no-touch technique, uses a scrotal incision, has a great size record, and this guy can take care of a lot of complex cases, infections, silicone filler that you can never put any sort of silicone filler. The only filler you should ever put on your penis is hyaluronic acid. So he can take care of a lot of complex cases. Actually, everyone that I've mentioned here, I don't know. Dr. Hackey used to have a YouTube channel. I don't know what happened to it, but Dr. E, Dr. Clavel, Dr. Kramer all have YouTube channels, which I'll link below. Great surgeon, and you can see some of the surgeries there. Particularly Dr. Kramer has some videos on some very complicated cases. So if you have a complex case, I think you should absolutely, and not just with Peyronie's, you should absolutely talk to Dr. Kramer. And then an honorable mention to Dr. Perito. He's in Miami. He also does the no-touch technique. Unfortunately, he does the infrapubic one. So that's the only white downside. So if I had like no choice and I couldn't find someone else that does the scrotal one, I would go to him. I think if you're older and don't care about the scar and don't really care about maximal cylinder sizing, he's a great option. He also has something called Eurofill, which is like the hyaluronic acid filler. So he's one of those that basically an expert in that. So if you're interested in that, you could go to him. But there's other places that you can get it. I believe Dr. Hackey also does hyaluronic acid filler. So that's why he's my second choice. So that's a list of the doctors that I would recommend in that order. And there you go. That was an exhaustive video on penile implants. It's a large topic. I try to compact it as much as I could. I think the real juicy part are the tips that for maximal results. Sizing is absolutely critical. It's important. Now, in my opinion, you should only really consider if you're impotent, or you have a severe case of Peyronie's. I think you should absolutely try injections first. They were a life changer for me. Good thing is that, you can become a shower. If you use a traction device and a BED, you can get the maximal size and you can essentially make it bigger, stronger, faster than, like that TV show where the Bionic Man, right? Like you're going to become a Bionic Man, a fucking sex machine, and you can literally just like fuck forever. And there's no pain. Like if you were to get injections, there's no dangers of priapism. It's great. You can literally get like a porn star penis and just fuck forever like a fucking machine. So, I think it has its use cases. A lot of the time I kind of like wonder, should I get one or not? It's still up there in my mind. But for now, I love injections. Like if I have a failure to launch, most of the time like pills actually work, but like I have injections as a backup. So I think that's great. And if you like this video, if you learn anything at all, throw some shekels my way. I'll put the cash up. But really the best way that you can help is by subscribing, leaving a like, leaving a comment. That really helps the algorithm. And make sure you check out these other videos and stay tuned for more. Peace.